All right. Good afternoon to all of you. My understanding is that today is Friday, which means that tomorrow is Saturday, and we should have the day off as well as Sunday. So here we go. The Secretary General this morning spoke to the high-level advisory board on mediation. He thanked the members of the board for their engagement and support, in particular to his goal for a call for a global ceasefire. They also discussed possible further efforts in that regard. The members of the board and the Secretary General also talked about the impact of COVID-19 on conflict situations and on mediation efforts, as well as some of the cross-cutting issues, such as the role of women and youth leaders. And in a statement we issued late last night, the Secretary General said he looks forward to the continuing close cooperation of the United Nations with the countries and institutions of the Central American Integration System, otherwise known as CICA, to address profound socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, including on food security, human mobility, gender violence, as well as climate change. The Central American Integration System remains an important framework for regional collaboration at a time when integration is more necessary than ever to respond to the emergency and recover better. And during a Security Council briefing on peace and security in Africa this morning, the head of peace operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, said that the G5 Sahel joint force is on the right track, although there is still a long way to go. The pandemic adds another layer of complexity to the already challenging security situation in the Sahel, he added. Terrorists and other groups in the region are attempting to capitalize on the pandemic to undermine the state authority and destabilize governments. Attacks on national and international forces continue unabated, and the civilian population continues to wear the brunt of the instability. The Undersecretary General said that strengthening the joint force is only one strand of a comprehensive international approach required to tackle the root causes of instability in Mali and Sahel in the region. Improving governance, eradicating poverty, and protecting human rights of all citizens, including the most disenfranchised, remains critical. More needs to be done to ensure that such efforts are given the same weight as military operations. And continuing on with peacekeeping, we have a few updates from the field. In Mali, the UN peacekeeping mission there, otherwise known as MINUSMA, it worked on the rehabilitation of the Songobia Bridge using over $90,000 from the Trust Fund for Peace and Security for Mali. The bridge, which links part of the Mopti region to Burkina Faso, is a crucial axis for exchanges between the two countries. Peacekeepers have also provided significant assistance for the creation of the temporary base of the G5 Sahel Joint Force in Senu. This was done in accordance with the mission's mandate and with support of funding from the European Union. And in the Central African Republic, the UN mission there reports that yesterday, peacekeepers responded to a disruption during a distribution of humanitarian assistance at the PK3 camp for displaced people in Bria. A police unit from the mission responded to the incident and secured UN staff and property. The situation is now reported as calm, although peacekeepers continue to patrol the area. The Central African Police is conducting an investigation. Yesterday's incident follows tensions with anti-Balaka elements in the camp, including an incident in May of last year. At the same time, UN peacekeepers are attempting to dismantle the anti-Balaka bases inside the premises, and they were targeted by camp residents who threw stone at them. And their peacekeeping colleagues in southern Lebanon report that primary health dispensaries and a mobile clinic in Tyre Kaza in southwestern Lebanon receive sanitary and personal protective equipment, which helps support families living in host communities. UNIFIL donated more personnel protective equipment to 4 public schools in the southwest area. And finally, our peacekeepers in Kosovo tell us they're funding a legal aid center which provides free legal aid to vulnerable groups, specifically women, pensioners, and minority communities. In response to the pandemic, the center has also adopted new methods to reach out to beneficiaries, such as live public television call-in shows, online videos, and client sessions. And heading back to Africa, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said today that in the past 8 months, about 1,300 civilians have been killed in conflict involving armed groups and government forces. She said she is appalled by the increase in the brutal attacks on innocent civilians by armed groups and by reaction of the military and security forces, who have also committed grave violations, including killings and sexual violence. Some of the incidents may amount to crimes against humanity or war crimes, she added. And in Panama, the government leads a process of gradual reopening. The UN team is working with the authorities and other partners to continue saving lives and livelihoods. Under the leadership of the acting resident coordinator, Cesar Nunez, the UN team has donated personal protection and other medical equipment to the government's pandemic response. With the UN Development Program as a technical lead, we have assessed the social and economic impacts of the pandemic. UNDP reports that the region expects up to a 25% reduction in tourism. The Panama Canal Authority received 35 cruise cancellations abruptly, ending the cruise season. And we've also launched with the government a communication campaign regarding violence against women. This is crucial considering that Latin America and the Caribbean has one of the highest rates of gender violence in the world. UN entities, including the Office for Drugs and Crime, the UN Population Fund, UNDP, and UN Women, are donating hygiene kits for female detention centers in Panama. And the UN Office for Drugs and Crime and others are also supporting the male and juvenile detention centers across the country. For its part, the UN Food Agriculture Organization is working closely with authorities to guarantee the inclusion of indigenous peoples as part of the government's food security assistance program. UNAIDS, UNFPA, and UNDP are working closely with the Ministry of Health to guarantee having a continuous supply of life-saving treatment for people living with HIV. That includes, of course, migrants. According to the latest WHO figures, there are over 14,000 confirmed cases of virus in Panama, and over 350 deaths have been reported due to COVID-19. And in Afghanistan, the UN and our humanitarian partners are continuing to support the government-led pandemic response. We have helped establish 10 testing labs and trained more than 3,200 health workers in infection prevention and control. We, along with our partners, have reached over 1 million vulnerable people with hygiene kits and hygiene promotion, as well as providing almost 4 million people with soap bars. We've also reached out to around 900,000 people with COVID-19 awareness and prevention measures kits, as well as providing approximately 74,000 people with psychosocial support services to cope with the mental health-related consequences of the disease. And in addition, 11,000 children have received home-based learning materials. Apart from that, or in addition from that, rather, aid agencies continue to deliver life-saving assistance in response to ongoing conflict and natural disasters to millions of Afghans, including with food assistance. We're also, along with our partners, revising the 2020 humanitarian response plan for the country, integrating the COVID-19 needs. The number of people needing humanitarian help is now estimated to be 14 million people, up from 9.4 million at the start of the year. And as of yesterday, Afghanistan had 18,054 confirmed cases, which includes, sadly, 300 deaths. And today is World Environment Day, and the theme for this year is Time with Nature, and it seeks to highlight the importance of protecting the world's biological diversity. We shared the Secretary General's message yesterday, in which he said we must put nature at the heart of our decision making. Today, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change launched its, quote, race to zero that will run up to the COP26. The campaign promotes a healthy, resilient carbon recovery and brings together a coalition of net zero emission initiatives covering 992 businesses, 449 cities, 21 regions, 505 universities, 38 of the biggest investors. And the UN Development Program today announced the winners of the 11th Equator Prize, which recognizes indigenous communities from across the world. The winning organizations showcase innovative, nature-based solutions for tackling biodiversity and loss of climate change. The winners this year come from Canada, Myanmar, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ecuador, Guatemala, Indonesia, Kenya, Madagascar, Mexico, and Thailand. And you can find more about their initiatives online. Today is also the International Day for the fight against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And according to our friends in Rome at the FAO, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities are responsible for the loss of between 11 and 26 million tons of fish each year. And that's estimated to have an economic impact of $10 to $23 billion. And following my briefing, we are delighted to welcome back our friend Reem, the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly. And she will answer your questions after I have tried to answer yours. Let's see what our friendly chat says, or see if I can see any tiny little hands or bigger hands. Edie, you have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Steph. I actually have two questions. One is on Libya. The GNA took Tarhuna today, and I wondered if you had any comment on that and any update on a meeting between the UN mission and the GNA delegation to follow up on the one held with Iftar's delegation on a ceasefire. And then I have something after that.
Sure. Obviously, we are following extremely closely the rapid developments on the ground in Libya as the fighting is continuing. I think our concern remains with the impact of the continued violence on civilians, as well as the knock-on impact forcing further displacements of civilian population. The mission calls on all the parties to de-escalate, to curb incitement and the use of hate speech. I think it's important to remind the parties of their responsibilities to abide by international human rights law, international humanitarian law. On the diplomatic front, the mission's leader, Stephanie Williams, is continuing her engagements with the parties, and this, as we've been mentioning, within the framework of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission. There's an existing draft ceasefire agreement that was presented to the parties in February, and that for us constitutes the most solid basis for resumption of the discussions between both parties involved in this conflict and to bring an end to the fighting. Your second question, Edie. So I can't hear you. There we go. Go ahead.
What about a day for the meeting between Stephanie Williams and the delegation from the government? You said it was going to be in
the coming days. Yeah, so we're still within the UN lingo. I think we're still within the framework of what constitutes the coming days. As soon as we have something, I'll let you know.
My second question is, what is the United Nations doing, if anything, to pursue a meeting of the quartet to follow up on
discussions are ongoing, being led by Mr. Mladenov from the region, and as soon as we have something to announce, I will let you know.
Does that mean?
Sorry.
Mean that he actually is trying to put together some kind of a meeting?
I think we, as we've said publicly, we think there would be a benefit from having a quartet meeting.
Thank you.
James A. Sorry. James.
Okay, I have a different question, but I'm going to follow up on that. Does the Secretary General and Mr. Mladenov then believe it is imperative to have that quartet meeting before what seems to be the clear deadline, which is July, and the date that Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's going to carry out annexation of parts of the West Bank?
I think we would like to see a quartet. I think we'd all benefit from a quartet meeting happening as soon as possible.
Follow-up question on Hong Kong. a group of parliamentarians from Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand have issued a statement saying that they would like to see the UN set up and the Secretariat set up a special envoy on Hong Kong. What is the Secretary General's view on that? And again, what is the Secretary General's view on the joint declaration and whether the provisions in it are binding?
Okay, on the Sino-UK treaty, I think let me go into a bit more detail than what I said yesterday. The Sino-British Joint Declaration on the question of Hong Kong, which remember is from 1994, is a bilateral treaty that has been registered with the Secretariat under Article 102 of the Charter. This only confers upon the Secretariat the obligation to register and publish the treaty, which was done, but nothing more. And in particular, there are no obligations to interpret it or even have a view on it. And just to put, I think just to put this in perspective, under Article 102 of the Charter, there are more than 73,000 bilateral or multilateral treaties that have been registered or filed or recorded with the Secretariat. So the interpretation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration on the question of Hong Kong is strictly up to the parties who have signed onto it.
Before you answer the other point, you are referring to it as a treaty. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman has referred it not, said the declaration was a unilateral policy announcement by China, trying to seem to rewrite history. The UN does consider.
I think the words that I used were very clear.
And my second question on the group of parliamentarians calling for a UN special envoy now on Hong Kong.
We haven't received anything, as far as I'm aware, officially. There are procedures and precedents on appointment of, speak here in very general terms, on the appointments of special envoys, special representatives, and obviously involves all the parties involved in that issue. But I will leave it at that. Let's see who else had a question. Mohsen, go ahead.
You hear me?
I can hear perfectly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if other friends asked this question or not, but my question is, what's the Mr. Secretary General's view of what is happening in the United States against press and journalists and other innocent citizens? Does he consider this behavior as a violation of human rights?
Look, we have already spoken on that. The Secretary General, I think, has mentioned that in his tweets. And this is, our position really is the same globally, is that people have a fundamental right to demonstrate peacefully, that the law enforcement should use restraint, but there's a fundamental right of peaceful demonstration that needs to be respected all over the world. And that, it's not this is something that we say whenever we get asked about demonstrations and violence. On the case of media, I think we've been very clear that a media that is not only free, but that is free to be able to do its job is critical to any democracy. And whenever media are attacked, anywhere around the world, those cases need to be fully investigated. Toby.
Oh, hi there, Steph. I was wondering just if you'd seen any reports about any of the delegations from the Democratic Republic of the Congo withdrawing from any UN bodies. I'm sorry, I don't have any more information than that right now, but I was wondering.
No, but if you come back to me with a little tiny bit more information to give me some sort of direction in which to look at, I would be pleased to do so. Gloria.
If there'll be any contribution from Myanmar to the refugees in Bangladesh, their conditions, environmental, of the worst in the world, and they could at least give some funding as prize winners.
I don't know, but we can check. But I don't know. But there's a humanitarian appeal for Myanmar, which is unfortunately underfunded, and we would urge people to contribute as well.
But that's why I felt it's a motive for them as prize winners to celebrate instead of serving champagne and caviar.
Well, I'm not sure champagne and caviar is on the menu.
Okay.
At least not on the menu. All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but we've had problems with the chat. Abdelhamid, I see you trying to say something, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Stéphane. Today is the 5th of June, is the 53rd anniversary of the June 5 war. And the UN has been involved with this war.
Sorry, is the anniversary of what war?
1967.
Yes.
June 5. So it's 53 years. The UN has been dealing with the consequences of this war. It has passed many resolutions, especially 242, which acknowledges that the illegality of acquisition of land by force isn't worth that the SG issues a statement on this important occasion.
Look, I think we all recognize the impact of the various wars that have taken place in the region, and I think all those wars, which has led to many victims, is a motivation for us to continue our work and to continue to move forward, to find peace for Israelis, for Palestinians, and based on the two-state solution. And that has remained our principle, and that remains the framework for our work as we move forward.
Isn't wise to reflect on the UN failure, 53 years of occupation, and almost nothing left for the Palestinians to establish the two-state solution or to establish their own independent state?
You know, I'm always happy to enter in a long discussion with you, but I think it depends what you mean. I think there's whose failure, what part of the UN you are talking about. What I can tell you is on the part of the Secretariat, the part of the Secretary General, he has not given up hope. And, you know, there are many times where people could have, on the Secretary General's end, people could have thrown up their arms, but that's not the case. And I think if you see what Mr. Mladenov has been saying over the past, since he took office, and his predecessors for that matter, we continue to push forward. We continue to, but this has to be a partnership with the parties involved, and as well with all those who have an influence on the parties. All right.
Sorry, Stéphane, on another issue. It's also today the 3rd anniversary of the blockade on Qatar by 3 other Gulf states and Egypt. And the UN was involved in the early stages of this crisis. And today the Emir of Kuwait is renewing his effort. Did the SG try to reach out to the Emir of Kuwait maybe to see if the UN can at least encourage the parties to talk to each other?
I think that has been our message since the beginning, and we would like to see this resolved. Iftikhar.
Stéphane, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Thanks. You read out a report from Michelle Bachelet, the UN Rights Chief, about the killing of 1,300 people by armed groups and security forces. Could you? I don't have the report. I just heard it from you. Does she name the areas or the countries where this killing took place?
This is as it relates to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We can send you the link to the full report.
All right. Thank you very much.
James, you're either blocking me or waving at me. I can't figure it out.
I'm waving at you because I thought I'd have another Friday question, if that's okay. And my question is about the UN reopening. I know your position on this. I know that you're waiting for the authorities in New York. I know that some ambassadors on the Security Council, the Germans who have the presidency next month, and the Russians would like the council reopened. I've asked this before, but I wondered if you could update us. Can you tell us what preparations are going on in preparation for a reopening? I mean, when I come into the building every day, and it's clear, for example, there are signs now marked on the floor to show 6 feet spacing. There are signs on the elevators. Give us an idea of the sort of work that's going on, because one assumes a building this large with the number of people that come through it is quite an undertaking. And also give us an idea, the various different departments involved, who is leading this effort.
It's going through a kind of senior emergency management group, which is a crisis group which exists just for this, with inputs from various departments, obviously guided by the medical authorities, in close contact with New York. They will meet again very soon to give some guidance to the Secretary General as to when to move to a next step, which could see a kind of phased reopening. We're identifying staff that is kind of critical staff that would be in the building. It will obviously depend on the wishes of member states. But as you well observed, preparations are underway in terms of signage, in terms of workspaces. But we're taking it kind of, I don't want to say one day at a time, but one phase at a time. We don't want to rush this, but we do want to be able to move forward when we feel it is safe to have an uptick in the number of people that will be allowed in the building at any one time.
Would it be possible at some point to get one of those people from this emergency committee to brief us on the plans?
Sure. Yeah, let's see what we can do. Maybe we could do something just kind of on background, so just to give you a sense. That would be we'll work on that. All right, Edie.
I echo what James said, and if we could get a background briefing, that would be great. And just a reminder, any progress on having a press conference with the Secretary General next month?
Yeah, we're moving in the right direction. That's what I'll say. At least we're not moving in reverse. All right, wave now or forever hold your peace, and otherwise I will hand it over to the lovely Reem. All right, Reem, all yours.
Happy weekend.
You too.
Weekend.